School psych and educator family, welcome back. I think it is the perfect time of the year to address a topic that many of you will benefit from. You're scheduled to attend a meeting and you get a heads up that the parent or legal guardian will be accompanied by an advocate and or attorney. Now, your brain speeds up and starts creating all kinds of scenarios about how this meeting may or may not play out. Now, some thoughts are legit and some are likely completely unfounded. And you start feeling a spectrum of emotions from annoyed and bothered to anxious and nervous. Now, for my veteran school psychologists and educators, you know how anxiety-inducing this scenario was the very first time you experienced it. And for my school psychologists in training, new school psychologists, and school psychologists and educators who have never experienced this, I want you to understand there's a pretty good chance that you will experience this in the future, especially if you work in a large school district. Quick disclaimer. In my career, I've been on both sides of the table. I've worked with school IEP teams and school district legal counsel, and I've also worked with parent advocates and attorneys. Bottom line is this: I've collaborated and worked with a lot of advocates and attorneys in my career. I worked with some who were an absolute joy to work with and were truly focused on doing what's in the best interest of the student. Now, I've also worked with some pit bull advocates and attorneys who were nitpicky, loud, rude, and an overall pain in the behind, but they were actually pretty good at their job and knowledgeable. And then I've worked with a couple attorneys and advocates who were nitpicky, rude, misinformed, borderline incompetent, disrespectful, loud, and they stretched meetings out as long as they could by asking some of the most obnoxious questions with the hopes of also stretching those billable hours. So understand that all advocates and attorneys are not the same, and you can't control that. But there are certain things you can control. And one of those things is making sure you always do what is legal, what is ethical, and what is in the best interest of the student, so you're prepared in the event you do get called out by an advocate or attorney in one of these meetings. So let's transition into our first tip, shall we? Let's get it. Tip number 1, breathe and remain calm. Now, what's one of the first things we forget to do when faced with anxiety and discomfort? We often forget to breathe. So breathe and try not to panic. Why? Well, the advocate or attorney is not the boogeyman. They're human, just like you. And you have a solid advantage because you did what was legal, ethical, and in the best interest of the student leading up to this point, right? Of course you did. Also, you're an expert in the field of school psychology, and you're an expert when it comes to the student's cognitive, academic, adaptive, and/or social-emotional functioning. Now, reminder, this doesn't just apply to when you receive the news about an advocate or attorney's presence. It also applies to the many moments leading up to and during the actual meeting. So once again, remember to breathe, remain calm, and don't panic. You got this and you'll be just fine. And for my veteran school psychologists, chances are you've been through similar situations in your career. So lean on your previous experiences to maintain your confidence that you'll not only survive, but you'll thrive in this situation as well. Number 2, relevant data and information are your best friends. Now, how many of you have a best friend? Great. Now think about who your best friend is. Some of you were thinking about your best friend you've had since kindergarten. Some of you were thinking about your sibling as your best friend. Some of you were thinking about your spouse or your partner. And I don't know, maybe some of you were thinking about your pet as your best friend. That's great. That's real cute, right? But when it comes to this meeting, relevant data and information are your best friends. You have the advantage of being able to interpret and make sense of the data being presented. Tip number 3, secure the purpose of the meeting. Now, this is a good rule of thumb for every meeting that you attend. Make sure you know the purpose of the meeting. Listen, everyone's time is valuable, and we don't want to waste time admiring the problem or trying to resolve a completely unrelated issue. This helps prevent the meeting from going off the rails, and it helps keep an hour-long meeting from ballooning to 3 hours or longer. Yes, to all of my new school psychologists and school psychs in training, this has happened. Now, what's a good way to do this? Number one, make sure the team has an agenda. Members may end up straying from the agenda at certain points during the meeting. It's expected, but the agenda is there to help guide the team back home so we can resolve any possible issues in an efficient yet timely manner, especially if you're working with a nitpicky advocate or attorney who only seems concerned about stretching out the meeting time and billable hours as much as possible. Tip 4. Ask if the attorney and legal representation for your school, school district, or facility has been notified and if they'll be in attendance. Now, most school districts have a policy for meeting with parent advocates and legal counsel. Typically, school districts don't want school teams meeting with advocates and or attorneys without district legal counsel. So if you haven't already done so, figure this information out. Now, this should be accessible in your district's administrative procedures or online. You can also ask your lead or chief psychologist, director of special education, or special education compliance officer. Look, you may be able to ask your legal counsel directly if you can track them down, but that's a big if. The bottom line is it's better to have access to this information and not need it than to need it and not have it. Tip number 5. Make sure the necessary faculty and staff are also invited to the meeting. Now, this one is pretty easy. One of the first things that will likely be brought up by the advocate or attorney is the absence of a required or recommended team member in the meeting. Now, for my fellow school psychologists, I know this typically isn't our responsibility, but I think one of our often unspoken rules is keeping the school district or facility out of due process and to keep them from getting sued. Now, I know the role and function of school psychologists varies depending on the state, county, district, population we're working with, etc. Some of us have very specific roles as the mental health professional in the building, and we get invited to meetings when the team feels our expertise is valuable. Now, in this scenario, we typically consult with the special education chairperson or case manager to make sure everyone who's supposed to be invited to the meeting has received an invitation. Now, in addition to conducting psychological assessments, counseling, consulting, crisis response, and the other core responsibilities we have as school psychologists, some of us are also in the role of special education chairperson and coordinator in the building, meaning we're responsible for scheduling meetings, preparing all of the necessary paperwork, communicating with the parent or legal guardian, and inviting everyone to the meeting. And in this scenario, we're typically the ones responsible for sending the invites to the appropriate attendees. All right, for number 6, I got one that some of you might not even know. Become familiar with your school district's guidelines and procedures for audio recording meetings. Now, many advocates and attorneys will come to the meeting and place a cell phone or recorder on the table to record the meeting. Some will tell you that they're about to hit record. They'll just be straight up about it, and others will do it covertly. Don't hesitate to ask if they're recording the meeting if you suspect they are. Look, I've done it quite a few times in my career, and they've always admitted it. Knowing your school district's guidelines and procedures for allowing meetings to be recorded, it's critical. Remember, information is your best friend. Now, family, the next tip is pretty long, but it's extremely critical, and I broke it down into subcategories. The next tip is preparation is key. The first thing I want you to take notice of is knowing your role in the meeting. Now, this goal is closely related to the third tip, secure the purpose of the meeting. So, why were you invited? Were you invited primarily to provide support and comfort to the team and to be an extra set of eyes and ears? Or were you invited to the meeting to provide some very helpful data and insight regarding the student? Were you requested to attend by the parent? Is this a meeting invite that you can decline if it has absolutely nothing to do with you? These are just a few of the questions you may consider asking yourself. Quick pro tip. I want to talk about something related to this topic, and the second tip. Relevant data and information is your best friend. Now, I started off this video with a disclaimer explaining how there's both good and subpar advocates and attorneys. Now, you may not know which one you're dealing with and where they rest on that spectrum, but lucky for you, many attorneys already have a reputation in your school district, county, or region, especially if you work in a large school district. So it can be extremely helpful to ask your colleagues if they're familiar with the attorney and or advocate who will be sitting across the table from you. This can help you get a feel for how the upcoming meeting may go, and it may also help to ease your anxiety, even if it's just a little bit. So sticking with number 7, preparation is key. Aside from knowing your role in the meeting, how else can we prepare? Well, by studying and reviewing necessary student files, data, and information. Also, prepare and provide ample copies of necessary documents. We're talking about written reports, we're talking about summaries, we're talking about data, etc. And then prepare to present your information to the team. Now, this is a perfect segue to the next tip, which is when you speak to the parent and or guardian. Now, I get it. You may be tempted to speak to the advocate and or attorney every single time. You may be tempted to get into a sparring match with them. Try avoiding this at all costs. Keep your ego in check. And remember, this meeting is not about you or the advocate or the attorney. It's about the student. And the person you should be speaking to is the parent. Now, this doesn't just apply to meetings with an advocate or attorney. In fact, our job is to inform the team, and the most important person at that table is the parent. Trust me, the majority of parents appreciate it when you take the time to break things down to them and answer their questions. Tip number 9, remain professional and don't take it personally. Now, this can be extremely tough to navigate. I get it, especially if you're dealing with an advocate or attorney who seems like they're going out of their way to insult you. And regardless of the advocate or attorney's personality or behavior, always, yes, always remain professional. While some of them are great to work with and very knowledgeable, some seem like they thrive off of rude behavior and disrespect. Also, don't take it personal if they request an independent educational evaluation or IEE. Remember, it's not about you. In fact, many advocates and attorneys already have their mind made up to request an IEE before the meeting is even held. Now, let me be very clear about this tip before we move on. Remaining professional does not mean you should be a proverbial punching bag or doormat. And with that being said, stand your ground and establish boundaries when necessary. Understand that you do not have to continue to sit there and tolerate abuse if anyone is speaking to you or treating you in a way that is blatantly disrespectful and demeaning. If necessary, it is okay to dismiss yourself from the table. Also, you're invited to this meeting for a reason. For my school psychs, yes, you are the school psychologist, and you should know how to do your job. So do not allow anyone to take away your clinical judgment and the ability to decide what assessments you will administer. You know what? I'm feeling pretty good today. So before I leave, I got 2 extra tips for you. Number 11, chances are you have an idea of your school support or IEP team's personalities and strengths and weaknesses. So it's probably a good idea for the team to hold an informal pre-meeting or briefing just to make sure everyone is on the same page and is aware of the purpose of the meeting and the agenda. That might also be a good time to go over some of these tips that we covered today with the rest of the team. And number 12, in the meeting, please pay attention to your legal counsel and read the room. If they think it's best to adjourn the meeting or they decide to get into a back and forth with the parent advocate or attorney, let them rock out. And if they give you a cue to stop talking, take it. Chances are they noticed something that you didn't. And it makes sense because this is what they do. Also, let's keep it a buck. It's rarely a good idea to upset your legal counsel in a meeting in the event that you do go to due process. All right, everyone, I really hope those tips are helpful for school psychologists, educators, administrators, and related service providers when prepping to attend a meeting with an advocate or attorney. Now, to be honest, I could easily do an individual video on each of these tips, and I know there's at least a half dozen more tips that can go on this list. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to leave a comment below and share what additional tips could go on this list that you learned throughout your career. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this video and the channel while you're at it. And in the meantime, make sure you take care of yourselves and take care of one another. Peace.